When you think about political organizing at Harvard, especially on the eve of an election, a few things might come to mind. Privilege, access, money.
And if you thought those things, you wouldn't be too off base. The Harvard College Democrats, for one, is backed by a federally recognized PAC. Student leaders at the Harvard Republican Club have dined with the former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and have pulled off speaking events with multi-billionaire Peter Thiel.
Talk to them, you'll find that the name dropping is constant and the access unparalleled.
They'll also tell you that all of it, the organizing, the networking, is available to any Harvard student who wants in on the action.
They'll say it doesn't matter if you come in tied to the world of politics or not. These groups have enough connections to go around.
And through it all, you'll get the sense that Harvard's run-up to the election goes far beyond the confines of campus.
It takes students to the Republican National Convention and the Democratic National Convention,
To Pennsylvania, to Georgia.
rubbing shoulders with some of America's most powerful politicians in some of the election's most high-profile moments.
Today on Newstalk, in an election special, we talk to the presidents of the Harvard Republican Club and Harvard College Democrats about the world of election organizing at Harvard.
From 14 Plimpton Street, I'm Frank Joe.
And I'm Yael Goldstein.
This is Newstalk. First, our conversation with Republican student leader Michael Ovid.
My name is Michael Ovid. I'm a senior at Harvard College. I'm also the president of the Harvard Republican Club, the chair of the Conservative Coalition at Harvard's Institute of Politics, and a member of the RNC's Youth Advisory Committee.
Thank you so much, Michael, for joining us to talk about the run-up to the election. Let's go to the moment, right after the first Trump-Biden debate, to when the Harvard Republican Club endorsed Trump shortly thereafter. In a statement after the debate, you'd mentioned that, quote, Donald Trump is the most qualified candidate to lead our nation as president of the United States. In fact, the, quote, only candidate with the mental capacity to run our country. I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit more about what you were thinking as you were writing that statement and your take on it now.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, look, we'd known for quite some time that President Trump was going to be the candidate we were going to endorse. And so I sent out a lot of internal polling and found ultimately that I think it was 90% of our membership wanted to endorse President Trump. And so I kind of said that's a really high number. And ultimately, the way that we go about endorsements is via a board vote. But for me, I did want to make sure that the board vote accurately reflected what most of the Harvard Republican Club students would themselves support the president.
For sure. And that's interesting, especially because it's quite the shift from, say, 2016, right? When 80% of club members didn't think that President Trump would be the best candidate for the Republican Party. Have you seen a shift in the Harvard Republican Club's perspective since?
Yeah, I mean, look, I wasn't there in 2016, so I don't know and I can't really attest to that. Obviously, I've spoken to a lot of people who were there in 2016 because I did want to make sure I was making the best decision for the club. And I think for me, when I was looking at our endorsement and the role that our endorsement could play, I really saw it as an opportunity to explain to Harvard students why the youth are supporting President Trump. And ultimately, that's what we did. And we touted his economic accomplishments, his immigration accomplishments, and so many more. And I'm happy to go through a lot of that with you.
Yeah. You named, for example, the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
You have it all pulled up. Good for
yes.
you. Good for you.
Thanks.
Because the unfortunate reality is on campus, a lot of students go by their 4 years at Harvard without encountering someone who disagrees with them politically. I think there's tremendous value to engaging with it, to understanding it, to understanding what the other side says.
Right, exactly. And ultimately, one thing that comes up too in conversations around political discourse on campus is, if we just look at the class of 2027, when they were surveyed, only 8.4% of them said that they were very conservative or conservative. And I'm curious then what it's been like sort of working against the numbers, if you will, in terms of sort of pushing out opinions and perspectives that you think students may not otherwise be exposed to.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the beautiful thing about Harvard Republicans is that we're not a monolith. We have people who support President Trump, who don't support President Trump, part of our membership. We have people who are fiscally conservative, socially liberal, and socially conservative, fiscally liberal. And I think the programming that I've put on for the Harvard Republican Club has largely been dedicated to ensuring that our speakers represent a diverse array of perspectives. The Harvard Republican Club is one of the sponsors of the inaugural Conservative and Republican Conference, and our keynote speaker was Peter Thiel. We had a former chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, Kevin Hassett, there, and we had 250 people there. We hosted it at the Sheraton Hotel in Cambridge. No one speaker agreed with any other speaker we brought in terms of their opinions and political perspectives. So as an example, we had Congressman Jeff Denham there and Congressman Will Hurd. Congressman Jeff Denham supports President Trump. Congressman Will Hurd ran against him in the primary. We've also had businessman and U.S. presidential candidate RFK Jr. before he endorsed President Trump. And we had former chair of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Bush, Greg Mankiw, who's also a close friend. He's a very big fiscal conservative, but he doesn't support President Trump. And that's why we've seen so much success.
For sure. And I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit more about that success, right? Because you mentioned the diversity of political opinions among conservative and Republican students on campus. You also mentioned that based on the polling that you did, 90% of the students did in fact support President Trump. I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit more about sort of that split and how you're having discourse along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, just because students at Harvard supported our decision to endorse President Trump and they themselves have indicated that they would vote for President Trump does not necessarily mean that their views of President Trump have changed since 4 years ago, because I think it's a really unique race. And when we did put out the poll, President Trump was going up against President Biden.
So would you say then that, when the race shifted to Trump v. Harris, that some of the students who otherwise would go for Trump at that point would have gone for Harris instead?
Look, I think it'd be an interesting poll to put out. I haven't necessarily put out that poll, but I should. But I think what we have seen, and in the conversations I've had, is that we really have been engaging a very diverse array of students. When I took over as president of the Harvard Republican Club last November, we had 112 people on our email list. There were the same, I would say, around 20 Republican students going to all our events. But the problem was that many of them shared the same opinions and perspectives about the Republican Party. I came in and I said, how can we increase that number? And we've consistently had over 80 people coming to our events.
I mean, we look at the 8.4% figure and say, oh, it's a small minority.
Right. But I do think that figure does have some sort of sample bias because A, by virtue of the people who respond to the poll, and B, I think that there is a genuine fear of social isolationism among some conservatives and Republicans.
This was an anonymous survey, though.
I understand. I know people personally that filled out that survey saying they were Democrats, but they themselves are Republicans.
Okay.
And again, many people have the perception that being a Republican must mean one thing.
Which is?
They think being a Republican, you must support lower taxes. You must be pro-life, right?
I mean, the common refrain, for example, is your letter endorsing former President Trump didn't explicitly sort of acknowledge the 34 felony counts, right? This is the common sort of criticism, right? And I'm here is giving you an opportunity to respond to it, basically. When you're saying that not all folks who support Trump are like in the sort of milieu of, okay, believing that we'd vote for Trump under any circumstance, right? I'm sure that's a part of it. Could you talk a little bit about that and sort of how you see it?
I mean, just to respond to your claim, and then I'll get back to what I was saying before, that we didn't respond to the felony counts. The first thing is it's an endorsement. I mean, the purpose of an endorsement is to endorse a candidate.
Right.
The second thing I would say is we actually do address that in our endorsement, specifically mentioning the many inaccuracies and the tremendous bias that existed in some of those charges and some of those cases. And I encourage
you... What would you say are the main biases and sort of things
we wrote them down. If you want me to pull them up, I'm happy to.
Okay.
There's this notion that being a Republican must mean one thing. It must mean that you support lower taxes. It must mean that you are pro-life. It must mean that you stand against illegal immigration. And that's why I think a lot of people don't identify as a Republican, because they don't fit into that small box that has been painted for them by many in the media, by many in society. And my response to that, and I've led the Harvard Republican Club with this in mind, has been that there's no one set definition to being a Republican. You can be a Republican and be pro-choice. You can be a Republican and support higher taxes. You can be a Republican and support illegal immigration. And that is totally okay. There are people who are voting for President Trump because he supports lower taxes, but they're pro-choice, they support illegal immigration, they don't support our border wall. Would you consider them Republican? Many people would because they're voting for President Trump, but they themselves may be Democrats who just care a lot about fiscal conservatism. And I'm just trying to say that for so long, especially on college campuses, being a Republican has been like the forbidden R word. If you say you're a Republican, you'll be canceled. If you say you're a Republican, that's a terrible thing because you must believe XYZ. People say if you're a Republican, you must be a bigot, you must be a racist. And that's just completely not true.
And so I'm curious, as a conservative student on campus and as sort of part of that spectrum, how have you found trying to have political discourse along lines of difference? Have you felt that it's been easier, harder? Has it sort of trended in certain directions during your time here?
When I came to campus, actually, I didn't want to say I was a Republican. I didn't want to tell people I was conservative. I actually, when I first came to campus, whoever asked me for my political views or political perspectives, I had told them I was a libertarian because I came to campus a little nervous, right? And so even though I knew I was a Republican, I wasn't yet ready to let people know that I was a Republican.
What do you say to the younger sort of conservative and Republicans on campus who are thinking about how they reckon with their political identity?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say is to anyone listening to this who's thinking about applying to places like Harvard, but might be discouraged because they worry that it might be too liberal an environment. I say 100% apply. Submit that application. Come to this university. We cannot give up on elite institutions like Harvard. Be open about what you think. And don't shy away from being a Republican. There is a tremendous support system designed for you. There is a tremendous community that's growing and flourishing that is designed for you. One of the initiatives that I've actually spearheaded on behalf of the Conservative Coalition has been the Alice Stewart Memorial Mentorship Program. So Alice Stewart, as a background, was...
Yes, of course.
was an Emmy Award-winning journalist who passed away really suddenly at, I think she was 52. She was a tremendous mentor to me. And so I founded a mentorship program in her honor. And so we have around 19 mentors part of the program, including former governors, former senators, former congresspeople, successful business people. We have the chief counsel of the RNC, another close friend, Matt Raymer. We have the former executive editor of the Wall Street Journal, Jerry Seib, who is not a Republican, but is interested in mentoring Republicans. Another close friend, the former governor of Wyoming, Matt Mead. And saying a lot of people are my close friends. But regardless, they're mentors part of the program that are designed to support people at Harvard, Republicans at Harvard, conservatives at Harvard. We've just launched it, and hundreds of people have applied.
Let's turn our attention more squarely, not just to what it's like to be a Republican student on campus, but more squarely to the election and the run-up to the election. I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about what the Republican contingency on campus has been doing in the run-up to the election as a part of campaign organizing efforts.
I mean, there have been a bunch of initiatives on campus. There have been phone banking. I mean, we've been getting prepared for a Trump win. We've had a bunch of speakers events on campus that have been geared towards voting, that have been geared towards phone banking as well, and we're planning a lot of trips, a lot of canvassing trips to Pennsylvania.
So I'm curious then, obviously you're a top student leader at Harvard. Harvard has also been in the news quite a bit in the past months. How do you think Harvard as a university fits into the discourse surrounding the election? And do you feel like sort of you have an active say and a platform and a voice in the run-up to it?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think I have an active say and a platform to express our opinions and perspectives. We've made a tremendous effort to use that platform for the better, to use that platform to engage others with Republican ideals and values.
So I'm sure, in the run-up to the election, you've also been generally aware of like what the Democratic side has been doing. I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about your sort of thoughts on their work so far.
Look, much like I think a strong Republican Party is necessary for a strong democracy, I think a strong Democrat Party is equally as important for a strong democracy. So I'm glad to see that the Harvard for Harris has had strong engagement, and I'm glad to see that there have been Democrats on campus who've been really excited about the election, because at its core, that's what makes our democracy flourish. That's what makes our republic flourish.
A lot of this conversation where you've been pointing to the political diversity among Harvard's conservative and Republican students about sort of encouraging younger students to be open about their political views. I'm curious, election day is going to happen. There is going to be an election result. If you position yourself like to the week after the election, what would you think about the sort of run-up in the past months in hindsight?
I mean, I think the run-up to the election should certainly be marked by tremendous bipartisanship, and that's what we've actually been doing over the past year. We brought back the annual Harvard Republicans versus Democrats debate for the Visitas students. So when incoming students come in, they come in for Visitas. And this past semester, we had around 300 people there. And these were people who were actively engaging in the democratic process, actively engaging in bipartisanship, hearing the other side. And like I said before, at its core, that's what Veritas, that's what truth is about, engaging with people who may disagree with you. So I think to answer your question, leading up to the election and in the weeks after the election, it's critical that we engage in more bipartisanship and further bipartisanship.
And conversation grounded in Veritas and truth.
Exactly.
For sure. One thing that both sides have said is that, the other side has a wrong version of the truth, right? For example, where we don't agree on the same set of facts, et cetera. Has it come up in conversations on college campuses, or for you, has it been sort of less front and center?
Yeah, I mean, look, in whatever it is, having a discussion about the underlying ideals, the underlying policies, the underlying facts is critical.
Yeah.
Period. Right?
Yeah.
I think Harvard's motto is significant, Veritas, truth, and it's something I think we've lost in this world, is truth. And the reason why is because people have been unwilling to engage in respectful dialogue, and that's something we've lost.
So right now, we're obviously ahead of the election. In the remaining weeks in the run-up to the election, what are you still looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to the election results if Trump wins. So, yeah, I mean, I've always been interested in assessing how the youth vote will end up shaking out, and the New York Times Siena College poll has found that young men are actually trending more and more towards Republicans. I think there's a bunch of other polls that have shown that even amongst young women, they're also trending more towards Republicans than they have in the past. For me, I've served as a member of the RNC's Youth Advisory Committee, so that's really been a salient issue. are the youth actually trending more towards Republicans than they have in the past? And why or why not is that the case? But even beyond that, how can the Republican and how will the Republican Party and the Democrat Party shift their narrative, shift their policy priorities to tailor them to the ever-changing youth bloc?
Thank you so much, Michael, for joining us on the podcast today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to sit down with you. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Michael.
Next, our conversation with Harvard College Democrats co-presidents Tova Kaplan and Victor Flores, which was recorded last week.
I'm Victor E. Flores. I'm a senior at the college studying government, ethnicity, migration, and rights, and I'm the co-president of the Harvard College Democrats.
I'm Tova L. Kaplan. I'm a junior at the college studying government and economics, and I'm the co-president of the Harvard College Democrats.
Thank you so much for joining me, Tova and Victor. So tomorrow, we're going to be officially 1 week out from Election Day. Is it your first time voting, either of you?
For me, it is. Yeah, I just turned in my ballot a couple days ago. A very exciting feeling.
This will be my second presidential election. Did vote for Joseph R. Biden in the 2020 election cycle, and excited to do so again for Kamala Harris in this cycle.
So since we're so close to the election, I want to hear, how do the Harvard College Democrats approach organizing and events and mobilizing the Harvard student body?
Yeah, so the Harvard College Democrats is the oldest collegiate democratic organization in the country. We were founded in 1829. However, the Democrats of old are certainly not the Democrats of today, and so we've consistently adapted to meet the political moment of each generation, each era. In this election cycle, we've definitely leaned into the tech-based election process, and so we're constantly making calls by phone banking and also coordinating canvasses.
And we've been focusing our efforts, especially in swing states, 2 trips to New Hampshire so far this cycle, a trip to Pennsylvania to go canvass in person. We try to had events on like career talks around the Democratic National Convention. We had Michael Blake, former DNC vice chair and New York Assemblyman, talking about empowering communities of color to go vote.
And we also don't try to lose sight of the local environment. And most recently, we've partnered with the Harvard Square Homeless Shelter right here in Cambridge to deliver meals to unhoused community members throughout the Cambridge community.
And our efforts are year-round, every single year, every single cycle. So we do mentorship. We've tried to connect with our alumni community to give students as many internship opportunities.
Yeah, so accessibility is very much a cornerstone. So we have a federally recognized PAC called Veritas Progressives, where we actively fundraise. And so we cover on all of our canvassing trips, including overnight trips, all food costs, all transportation costs, all housing costs, including in-district transportation we were trying to get from the field office to the turf.
So what has student turnout been like these past few months?
Yeah, we've had an incredible amount of student turnout. For our canvases, we tend to have student interest that exceeds the amount of seats that we have available. So students are excited. We have fun. We bump the playlists on the way over. They just feel that this election is important and the issues matter to them.
Yeah, we've seen that consistently. I was part of the 2020 board, and granted that was in the COVID environment, but we weren't even filling our Zoom rooms. But now we're seeing an immense amount of student interest for this particular election cycle in a way that we had not seen before. Part of that is we're kind of the folks who lead the coalition building in the absence of, say, Young Democrats of Massachusetts, going out of our way to get in touch with all of the Boston schools so that all their members are also represented in the contingencies that we send. So we not only see accessibility as something that we expand to the Harvard community and the resources that we're allotted and the visibility that we have for members of the Boston undergraduate community more broadly.
I'm curious, did student involvement change after the change in the Democratic ticket during the summer?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. When there was the change at the top of the ticket, we held an endorsement jamboree over the summer, which is the Harvard College Democrats' way of officially endorsing candidates, and our members vote, and a 2/3 majority endorses that candidate, and we agree as an organization to actively campaign for them. But even with it being on Zoom over the summer, we had massive turnout.
Can you guys just walk me through what emotions you were feeling as student organizers when you learned that President Biden was stepping down as the Democratic nominee?
Yeah, I will say personally, watching the debate, I was extremely disappointed in the kind of performance that President Biden delivered. And so I was personally incredibly excited to see Vice President Harris assume the nomination. And especially as a fellow child of immigrants, personally really inspiring as well.
So for me, at the time, I was actively working in the Party Affairs and Delegate Selection Department at the DNC. I started in February. I had gone through and helped certify a lot of Joe Biden's delegates in all the different states. And ironically, I was working so hard, spending long hours at the DNC. And then when I found out, it was my day off and I was at a Renaissance fair with my family in a corset holding an oversized Renaissance fair pickle. And I'm of course, that's how I find out. But it was really interesting to see kind of from the inside. Certainly there was a huge surge of energy when the switch happened. There was actually a rules committee meeting to decide the new rules for the nomination, which I got to help staff that and script write for that. And then the delegates were sent a ballot to vote on who the nominee should be. They needed people from the DNC to count the ballots, and I was asked, "Oh, Tova, do you have some time to devote to this project?" And I said, "Yeah, but I can do you one better. Do you want really smart students to help count those ballots?" And they said yes. So we had several students get trained by the DNC. So we got to have a very small but very substantive role in making that Democratic Party history, but definite overnight shift in energy. Suddenly, it felt like we had momentum to mobilize the Harvard community, working with student groups like Harvard for Harris for the top of the ticket on canvases and planning sessions, but also down ballot races, which we endorse as well.
So it seems like you guys had the really unique experience of being able to go to the DNC and to hand count those ballots. In what other substantive ways do you feel like Harvard as a whole really fits into the discourse surrounding the election?
Yeah, I think we've seen that education and higher education specifically has become now a political issue. You have candidates who are sitting members of Congress who will actively denigrate the Harvard name, and then recognizing the particular access that we have. I mean, the Institute of Politics was able to send students to both the DNC and the RNC. Not every school has that. A lot of our organizing is derived directly from leveraging our own networks. And so Tova, having the ability to be at the DNC, provided our members with the opportunity to attend as volunteers as well, to the point that there was a New Yorker cartoon made of me as I was lost around Chicago trying to find my way from convention center to convention center with a whole bunch of fences up and ran into a New Yorker cartoonist. But I think most importantly, recognizing that Harvard allows us the privilege of not only using the name, but also it does source from a particular demographic of student that is well connected and has networks that we can leverage for the broader student population.
Right, and just overall, being Harvard College Democrats, we have a massive spotlight on us. Every Harvard student has an increased spotlight, but especially in the political realm, our name carries weight. When we make an endorsement of a candidate, sometimes that's one of the first endorsements they list out of anybody. Sometimes they don't want to list us at all. They don't want to be associated with us because of because of the connotations of Harvard, and we are totally fine with that too. And I know Victor and I, as co-presidents, one of our main goals has been to make connections across Massachusetts politics, across national politics, to use our really brilliant members and give them as many opportunities as they can. So we've been working a lot with the Massachusetts Democratic Party. We helped staff and count ballots for their internal party election, as well as Ayanna Pressley's district, their delegate election. Even something as simple as that gets students in the room, connects them to the campaigns of figures like Elizabeth Warren and Ayanna Pressley, who we've gotten to meet on many occasions and work with. We jump on that.
What are some of the most memorable moments of these past few months? What are some of your favorite stories?
Yeah, so this past weekend, a group of students from Harvard for Harris and the Harvard College Democrats flew down to Georgia to go and canvass. I never thought, as someone who's a first-gen low-income student from middle of nowhere, rural Connecticut, I'd get the opportunity to all of a sudden be in Georgia and really feel like I was making a difference, connecting with voters. I mean, the 59th of 60 doors that I knocked in the last round of canvasses that we did, I spoke to someone who genuinely felt that they were on the edge regarding who they were voting for, and asking them, okay, what are the issues that you care about most, and how it is that the Harris-Walz ticket might align best with that perspective, but recognizing that these are holistic issues.
So my favorite story is our Pennsylvania trip that we did 2 weekends ago. I think all of my idols in politics have some insane political lore. And obviously electing Kamala Harris and winning Democratic victories up and down the ballot is my goal. But if I can make some exciting lore along the way, that's awesome too. And so we were bringing a group of students to Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, our bus canceled last minute, and a student sitting next to me, just an attendee of the trip, kind of turns to me and says, well, I have a car. I can take a few students. And the girl sitting next to him, who didn't even know him before that, said, I'll go to Pennsylvania. And I said, well, I'll go to Pennsylvania. And suddenly we had students piping up and saying, well, I'll go to Pennsylvania. And this was around 5 hours after we were supposed to leave. All right, well, students still want to go to Pennsylvania. Almost all of them were first-time canvassers. Almost none of them knew each other. We were bumping playlists in the cars. We made pit stops and got fast food and drove all the way up to Philadelphia. I think I went to sleep at 3 a.m. And we woke up early the next morning and went and canvassed. And by this time, a lot of people had heard our story of these crazy Harvard students who made it to Pennsylvania. The local congresswoman from the area, Congresswoman Scanlon, actually made a special stop to talk to our students for over an hour. She was so impressed by our group that she pulled me aside and offered to connect students with internships or give advice or anything more our group needed. And then what I was most impressed by was the students themselves. Typically, we pair students up to go knock on doors, but I was told by the members, you know what, we made it all the way. We're running short on time. Let's just each take our own list, which is not common in canvassing. I mean, for a lot of first-time canvassers to go to a new neighborhood in a new state and be so devoted to the cause that they're going and knocking on doors on their own. And so our group actually ended up knocking on twice as many doors as, would have been expected for a group of our size. By my estimation, around at least 550 doors just among the 16 of us. Many people answered the doors, and I was told directly by multiple students that they directly swayed voters. And I heard from a lot of the people on the trip that it was really meaningful, that it was kind of the spark to stay involved in politics. And at the very least, I think we were able to make an impact in a moment where it was really needed. And the campaign couldn't wait to call us and ask us when we could come back.
So tell me what this upcoming week looks like for you guys in the last moments before the election.
Yeah, this week will be quite busy. We'll have an on-campus group that will be making calls throughout the day for our endorsed candidates, again, prioritizing those who are in swing districts. And then finally, we'll be capping off the night with our co-sponsorship of the Institute of Politics Watch Party hosted in Sanders Theater. Win or lose, the Harvard College Democrats, which we know we will win. But no matter the outcome that we see at the end of this, we know that we have done everything that we could when it all comes to an end, and the ballots are finally being counted on election night.
As major student organizers on campus, and even just as, politically involved students here at Harvard, what has been your major takeaway about the nature of the political landscape at Harvard, about the nature even of the student body here?
Yeah, essentially, I've just been really blown away by the excitement and the enthusiasm of our students. Organizing is hard, but it's worth it. If things were easy, the country would be very different. But through a lot of work, through frustration, through compromise, we really can make a difference. And that's what gives me hope at the end of the day.
Yeah, I've learned that this kind of broader generalization of kind of the privileged nature of the Harvard student is very much a fiction. It really doesn't matter what your background is. I myself am a first-generation low-income student. I never thought that I would get into Harvard, let alone become the co-president of the Harvard College Democrats. And so while I may not be the most connected person, leveraging every aspect of myself and my ability to reaffirm that it does not matter where you're coming from. It doesn't even matter the way you think about X issue or Y issue. What matters is your dedication to what are these fundamental democratic values, and that's all you need to really succeed in this space.
Thank you so much for joining me, Victor and Tova, to discuss your experience as student leaders and organizers at the Harvard College Democrats.
Thank you for having us. We really appreciate our time. Thank you.
Thank you.
This episode of Newstalk was co-hosted and produced by Yael S. Goldstein and Frank S. Joe.
Our multimedia chairs are Julian J. Giordano and Addison Y. Liu. Our associate managing editors are Elias J. Schiskell and Claire Yuan.
Our managing editor is Miles J. Herzenhorn, and our president is J. Sellers Hill.
From 14 Plimpton Street, this is Newstalk.